Newstalk Breakfast.
In association with AIR. Do anything, anywhere with high-speed 4G mobile data coverage across 96% of the population.
This is Newstalk.
Now here in Newstalk Breakfast, over the past number of weeks and to continue into the future, we've been highlighting, investigating violence against women, not just domestic violence, but random acts of violence and why men in general are violent towards women. We've been speaking to victims of abuse. We've been talking to the authorities and the services involved, and also with academics to try and find an explanation for this kind of behaviour. Now, earlier this year, Minister for Justice and Equality, Charlie Flanagan, announced a number of changes to the Domestic Violence Act that would see greater protection for victims of abuse, and he joins us on the line now. Minister, violence against women is a scourge that has in our society, that has always been here in our society, and it's in every society. What can this government do to help the plight of women who do find themselves in these appalling situations?
Yes, I believe it's absolutely essential that we use all of the resources of the state against this insidious activity against women. And can I say that your programme over the last number of weeks provided a great platform for people to discuss this issue. I listened to some of your shows, not them all, and I think it was a fine example of the type of public service that Newstalk provides, because nobody deserves to feel afraid in their own home. Nobody deserves to feel threatened, and people have a right to feel safe, and people have a right to be respected in their own home and, of course, in their relationships.
Well, we appreciate your very kind words, Minister. But this is an area, you've said that about this Domestic Violence Bill 2017. You've called it one of the most important pieces of legislation to come before the Oireachtas this year. Give us a bit of detail of what's in there.
Yeah, well, from now on, any victim of domestic violence, it's estimated that 1 woman in 5 is affected by domestic violence. That's a very big figure, and that's an alarm bell that really should activate everybody involved to act seriously against it. So from now on, a victim will be able to apply for what's called an emergency barring order. This will last for a period of 8 days, and this will be applicable where there's an immediate risk of significant harm. The concept of a safety order from the court will be extended, and we have a new crime, a new offence of coercive control, which will involve a person making an allegation or an accusation against another of emotional abuse, humiliation, intimidation.
Now, let me just focus on that for a second, if I can, Minister, because this is certainly new ground, very much new ground from a criminological point of view. Now, but it is also, it would be argued, because this is this psychological abuse in an intimate relationship that causes fear of violence or serious harm or distress. It's very much the most insidious form of abuse. But because of the nature of coercive control as described, this is psychological battery rather than physical battery, it's going to be very, very difficult for a Garda to get the evidence to bring that before the courts and prove it beyond all reasonable doubt, is it not?
Yes, I accept it's going to be challenging, but because it's challenging doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It's only commencing now. I've been following what's happening across the water in the UK. And really what I want to ensure is that as well as having the legislative framework, that of course we have the activity on the part of the Garda Síochána. And over the last couple of years in particular, I want to acknowledge a sea change in terms of the attitude of the Gardaí in assisting women in particular in domestic situations. We now have the National Protective Services Bureau, led by a chief superintendent. We have a new nationwide network of Garda Victim Services offices with dedicated and trained staff. And this is something that I'm very keen to see rolled out right across the state, because in order for a court to make an order against somebody, you're right, we must have the evidence.
In fact, you did mention the National Protective Services Bureau. I have to mention, we did an interview here last week with a Detective Sergeant, Laura Sweeney, and I have to say we got a phenomenal response from the public because she was refreshingly open and candid about this whole area and was really concerned about it. And from as a seasoned observer, she really did, for me, represent a completely new thinking in this area. Now, just on that subject, anecdotally, we're told, and this is a well-known fact, an established fact in law enforcement everywhere, that women who make complaints to the police about domestic violence or domestic abuse tend to, in a lot of cases, the vast majority of cases, predictably, and the police predict this when they go to a case, they withdraw those allegations, because by and large women in these situations are completely undermined, they're shattered, they have no self-esteem, no self-confidence, and cops will always say to you, and there's international studies to back this up, that they get very cynical about it. They go to a so-called domestic, which is the majority calls that frontline cops have to deal with, and they say, here we go again, this person is going to withdraw this case after a while, and it's very frustrating. How do we get around that, or is there any way around that?
Yeah, I think we need to ensure, and I know Garda Sweeney and her team, I think they're doing very good work. And I believe it's absolutely essential that women feel sufficiently confident and comfortable that they can work closely with the Garda Síochána. And of course, with all the advocacy groups across the voluntary sector, Women's Aid and other groups, there are centres now, not only in Dublin and Cork, but also across provincial Ireland. But the important thing is that women in particular no longer feel afraid or fearful, and they acknowledge themselves and have the confidence to acknowledge that they have the right to feel safe and respected. I want to acknowledge what the Gardaí are doing. I will continue to provide appropriate funding in order to build capacity, including the area of IT, including new recruits, increasing the size of the Garda service, ensuring that Gardaí are free to do the work that they're trained to do across the front line, but also in specialist areas. Because ultimately, I believe we can do more to tackle the insidious nature of domestic violence.
So the new approach from the Gardaí is they want to let people know that they're believed and supported. They're the two things that every abuse victim wants. Now, is there anything in this legislation for judges? Because I know of several cases, anecdotally myself, that I dealt with as a journalist, and only up to recent times as well, where women say they've gone to Gardaí, and the Gardaí accept that these women are in danger of violence, and they go to a judge. One judge down the Midlands in particular I'm thinking of, who the guards are telling one victim, who I was very, very worried about, that there was no point, because the judge wouldn't give them the barring order, even though the cops themselves said, look, I think you do deserve to get a barring order here, but this judge is very difficult to get barring orders from. What do we do in a situation like that when there's somebody's in terrible?
I'm not going to comment on individual courts or individual judges, but this is an area that I have been discussing with the Chief Justice and a team of judges across the President of Courts. What we're now seeing is specialist family judges who have an in-depth knowledge in this area, judges who are not hopping from a licensing case or a civil case or a trespass case and suddenly then into a domestic violence case. What we need to do is ensure that we have a separate family division of the courts.
And when do you reckon that will be fully up and running, Minister? Because that makes perfect sense. But when do you think you will have judges trained up to that level who are there for that specific purpose, who can see through all of this?
I'm satisfied that we're seeing that now. Across the whole suite of family measures, we are seeing specialist judges. We are seeing these cases being taken at the top of the list. We are seeing, of course, under the new Domestic Violence Act, emergency cases being held at weekends. We are seeing judges on call. We are seeing judges taking cases at very short notice on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning, depending on the circumstances, in order to ensure that society as a whole and that the arms of the state, be it the Gardaí and the judiciary, are taking this matter more seriously, and I believe they are.
OK, we leave it there. Minister for Justice and Equality, Charlie Flanagan, thank you very much for joining us.